Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to enable a few extra security features on our server, as well as install two pieces of software, Fail2Ban and our UFW firewall. Now, to quickly go over what Fail2Ban and UFW is Fail2Ban is a IP monitor that monitors all your logs and tests to see who's trying to pretty much brute force into your system. So if I tried logging in like 3, 4, 5, 6 times wrong password, it's going to go ahead and ban the IP address. It only bans it probably for maybe a few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes max. And what that does is, say for instance, if I actually am legitimately trying to log in, I forgot my password, it will go ahead and re-enable my IP address so I'm able to log in. But if you're trying to brute force and you start getting all these ban errors, you're going to more than likely probably stop trying to log into the system. So that's what Fail2Ban really does. You can also do a few editing in the config files and everything, but I will not go over that in this video to try to keep it as short as possible. And UFW is basically the Linux firewall. What that will go ahead and do is it just pretty much enables your firewall, and we're going to allow select ports. For instance, our SSH port, our HTTP port, and our HTTPS port, as well as a few other ones if we want to later on down the road. It will also go ahead and lock our global connection for incoming so that only select ports that we allow to come into our port will be allowed, and it will go ahead and enable all outgoing because we do want it to communicate outside the world. So pretty much we'll go here and look at my guide that I created. The first thing we're going to do again is enable the extra security features. Now it's a very straightforward way of doing it. We just have to go into the systemcontrol.config file and just hashtag a few configurations in there. So for us to go ahead and do this, we're going to type in sudo nano etc and sysctl.conf. Type in our password, and then we're going to be greeted with our config file. Now in here, this pretty much controls how the system wants to work, especially when it comes to networking. We're going to go ahead first off enable spoof protection. So you scroll down here, we have these two here that are checked off or hashtagged off. We're going to remove the tags for them. And what this does is that it just enables spoof protection against our server. All right, then after that, we're going to want to go ahead and go further down. Keep going. And then we want to go ahead and untack the MITM, which stands for man in the middle attacks. We want to go ahead and pretty much pull them off so that we cannot have to worry about too many pings, pretty much for your ICMP, and redirect it back to them. Now, the last three things we want to go ahead and enable is we want to enable the blocking for ICMP redirects, which is ping. As it says here, we're not a router, and this server is not a router. So this pretty much blocks all ping attacks directly to the server to prevent brute forcing and DDoS attacks as well. And then the same thing here with the IP source route packets. We're going to go ahead and untag them because, again, as it says, we are not a router, and the server is not a router. So there's no reason to go ahead and keep them disabled. And the final thing we're going to want to do here is to log all Martian packets. So Martian packets are pretty much as they are. They're packets that we're not really sure where they're coming from. They haven't been, blacklisted or whitelisted at the moment. So we want to be able to take a log of it. So in case there's an IP that does get through for whatever reason, we're able to figure it out, and if we want to later on ban and block it. So that's actually all we have to do with the system control config file here. Once we go ahead and pretty much remove the hashtags of all of them, we can go ahead and save our file. And as you can see, very simple, very easy to go. And if you go into here on our actual setup here, I went ahead and broke it down for anybody that wants to go look at it. So in the file, when you see this section here, this is what you have to untag, and then the same thing all the way down. The next thing we're going to want to install is Fail2Ban. Now, as I said before, Fail2Ban is pretty much a software that monitors your logs and verifies if anybody's trying to brute force into it with too many failed authentications to the server. This is very good for most people because if you do know your password, there's a very good chance you are logging in. And if you have an encryption key, you should be allowed to log in. If you don't, more than likely this person is trying to do some kind of malicious intent to your server to cause harm, and we don't want that. So very easily, it's sudo apt install fail2ban -y to allow yes, and then we'll go ahead and wait for it to finish installing, which only takes roughly around a few seconds. I'll go back to our file here. Now, once it's installed, it should automatically enable itself, but I also went ahead and wrote the two scripts here to enable and to start fail2ban in case it doesn't. So sudo system control, which I believe I'm doing it correctly, I could be wrong, that's correct. Enable fail2ban. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, but instead of using enable, we're going to type in the word start. If everything's done correctly, you'll see the exact same on my screen here, where it'll go ahead and enable the service, as you can see above. And then when you do start, you'll never be prompted with anything, but it'll go ahead and let you know. Now, again, if you want to know the status, if it is actually running, just go ahead and type in status fail2ban. As you can see here, the service is actually running as it says here, and everything is good to go. And that's pretty much it for fail2ban. There's really no command that you go into it. There's nothing you can really change or add to it. Like I said, it just monitors your your IP logs and see if there's anything that's acting a little malicious or not normal outside the spectrum of the server here. So the next thing we're going to do real quickly is install UFW and then configure the firewall to allow select rules, as you can see here. We're going to deny most incoming and allow all outgoing. And then we're going to go ahead and enable the UFW. So first things first, sudo apt install UFW-y. Okay, so now we went ahead, enabled it. So we can go ahead and actually start the process now. But the thing is, I like to configure the firewall rules before we start it, so we don't have to keep restarting the service every time we do it. So the easiest way of doing it, as you can see here, is just adding your actual, your ports available right now. Now, as you can see, I have two different styles of port configuration. One is limit and one's allow. What limit does, it actually limits the amount of connections allowed per port. So we're telling it that on SSH to limit the amount of connections from user to server. I do believe that they actually specify in the config file what the limit is, but I believe the maximum limit is 3. But you can change that at any given time. You can make it 1, 2, 15, whatever you want. But the more people you allow to it, the more chances are you're going to compromise your system. So to go ahead and do that, it's sudo UFW limit, and then we're going to type in the port that we want. So my port for SSH is 2200, and my protocol is TCP. Go ahead and press enter. And then if you're going ahead and everything's good, you'll be given a rules updated and rules updated v6. So we're going to do the same thing for our HTTP and HTTPS, which is sudo UFW allow, because I want to allow all traffic, for 80. And then they're going to be the same thing for 443. Now you can go ahead and add a few other things. So on this server here, I actually have another program called Webmin, and that's actually installed as well. And that uses port 10,000. So for me, I want to go ahead and sudo UFW allow 10,000 on TCP. Now I can go ahead and change that as well to a limit, and again, it'll only limit the amount of connections for that port as well. So it's up to you how you want to do it. If you want to know what Webmin is, you can check out my other videos. on my channel to go ahead in more detail of how to install Webmin and what it actually is. But to give you a quick summary, Webmin is a graphical user interface through the web browser. So if you're using a command line only server and you're not really good at command lines, this allows you to actually configure your server through a GUI via web browser. And you can do it from anywhere in the world. So if you're in the USA and then you happen to go to Europe or you need to configure it, you can still do the same configurations, overseas or anywhere in the world. So next thing we have to do is configure our global connections. Now, very simply, hit the wrong button. So very simply, sudo UFW default deny incoming and allow incoming. So it pretty much says that all our global connections, our default would just be to deny all incoming as per this. And the same thing with outgoing. Our default for all outgoing will be allow. So sudo UFW default, and then we're going to hit deny incoming, as I spelt that wrong, which more than likely I spelt it wrong, but I'll go ahead and I did, so we got to go ahead and go back and default deny, and then you'll go ahead and be given the prompt you see on the screen here. Now sudo UFW default allow outgoing. Again, if I knew how to spell, we will be good. Okay, so as long as you spell everything correctly, you'll be prompted with the default outgoing policies changed to allow and the default incoming policies changed to deny. So now that we have our rules and ports and everything configured, now it's time to go ahead and enable our UFW. So now we go back over here. It's very simple to enable UFW, very simply by just typing in sudo UFW enable. So sudo UFW enable. Wait a few seconds. And now it tells you that the firewall is active and enabled on system startup. If your firewall gives you some form of error at this, please check the log file to figure out exactly what's going on in the UFW folder. But more than likely, if you follow the tutorial that I just did and everything's been successful, you'll be greeted with this successful response. Now, the same thing, if I wanted to see the status, I'll just type in sudo UFW status. And then what you see here is all the ports I allowed available open. So as you can see here, I have my SSH, my HTTP, HTTPS, and my Webmin ports are all either allowed or limited. And then the same thing on v6. Now my IPv6 is actually disabled, so those actual rules don't apply at all. But it's still good to have on there in case you accidentally enable it and you're not realizing what you did wrong or what's going on. Now you can go ahead and check the actual status of UFW in system control. So system CTL status UFW, and as you can see here, it's saying that it's right now not active, it's not running, and that it is loaded though. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to actually start it. So sudo system control start UFW, press enter. And then we check the status. As you can see now, everything is actually good to go and running. Well, and that's pretty much it to adding the extra features and the firewall and so on. Now, you can go ahead and change anything you want in this. Like, again, if you want to add more ports to your firewall, you would just follow the same system I had going on here when I did the limit and allow and the port numbers. If it's a UDP, you type in UDP. If it's a different protocol, you type in the protocol you need. But that's about it, and that's all you really need. So what we're going to do real quickly is I'm actually going to log into my Linux terminal on my Linux Mint, and I'm going to make sure my SSH still works properly. Now, we already know that it's not going to work on Windows because we've already been denied that before we even applied the protocols. So let's hop over to our Linux Mint and try to see if we can still SSH into our server. Okay, so now we're over here on our client for Linux, and I'm using, like I said, Linux Mint. I'm going to open up terminal. And then as I did before, I'm just going to go ahead and type in SSH-P. All right. Then we're going to do quotation 2200, and then another quotation at the server I want to go at, admin at 192.168.3.10. Press enter. And as you can see here, we're still able to log in. So even though the firewall is turned on and active, it knows that our SSH port at 2200 is open and that our encryption key is still functioning the way it should be. And let's head back over to our server real quickly. So let's go ahead and figure out and kind of wrap up what we've gone through in this entire tutorial. We went ahead and created a static IP. Then we went ahead and disabled root and created a new root user. We went ahead and created an SSH server on the server. We created a encryption key from a client to our server and verified it works. Then we went ahead and locked down our SSH config file to allow only our encryption from our client to our server. So if you don't have an encryption key, you cannot log into the system, or if your encryption key is broken, you will have to go ahead and redo the encryption key. We also went ahead and tested on the Windows client to verify that it doesn't connect, and that was true. It was successfully unconnecting to our server with an error saying the key was invalid. Then we went ahead and enabled our extra security features, which is pretty much stopping pings, DDoS attack, brute forcing, and so on. Then we installed Fail2Ban, which again is a IP monitoring software that will ban your IP address if you have too many failed attempts to the server. And then finally, we went ahead and enabled our firewall on our Linux server. And then we tested it with our client to make sure that we can still log in with our client. And then we locked down all the ports that we need to and changed our global incoming and outgoing to either deny or allow depending on our access we needed.